October 1962. The world was closer to nuclear war than it had ever been, and closer than it would ever admit. On the surface, life appeared normal. Politicians stood behind podiums, cameras flashed, speeches were calm, controlled, carefully chosen. The United States and the Soviet Union argued over missiles placed in Cuba, each side claiming restraint, each side warning the other to step back. But beneath the ocean, the war had already begun. Deep in the Atlantic, Soviet submarines were being hunted by American warships. Practice depth charges, meant as warnings, detonated again and again, sending violent shockwaves through the water. To those above the surface, they were signals. To the men below, they felt like an attack. Inside one of those submarines, B-59, conditions were unbearable. The steel hull trapped heat like a furnace. Temperatures climbed past 45 degrees Celsius. Oxygen levels dropped dangerously low. Sweat soaked uniforms. Men gasped for air. Some collapsed at their posts, too weak to stand. There was no communication with Moscow, no confirmation. No orders, no reassurance. Days had passed in silence. Every officer aboard believed the same terrifying truth. World War III had already begun. And if that was true, they had standing orders to respond. Hidden deep within the submarine was a single nuclear torpedo, a weapon powerful enough to annihilate an entire fleet, powerful enough to turn the ocean into fire. One command, one decision, and the world above would burn. The nuclear torpedo aboard B-59 was not a rumor. It was not a threat meant only for deterrence. It was real, armed, fueled, waiting. Hidden deep inside the submarine, the weapon carried the power of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, multiplied several times over. If launched, it would not simply sink enemy ships, it would ignite the ocean itself, sending a shockwave of destruction across the sea and into history. Above the submarine, American warships continued their assault. More depth charges exploded. Metal screamed. The hull shuddered. Inside the control room, officers gripped railings to stay upright. Sweat ran into their eyes. Tempers snapped. Fear thickened the air more than the heat. Captain Valentin Savitsky had reached his limit. Convinced that war had already begun, he slammed his fist against the console. "They are attacking us," he shouted. "We will not die like rats." His voice cut through the chaos. He ordered the crew to prepare the nuclear torpedo. Protocol demanded agreement from 3 senior officers. Savitsky gave his approval without hesitation. The political officer followed immediately. 2 keys were ready. 2 men believed the world above had already chosen destruction. All that remained was one final consent. The submarine shook again as another explosion echoed through the water. Men waited for the command that would end everything. But there was still one officer who had not spoken. One man standing between panic and annihilation. His name was Vasily Arkhipov, and the fate of the world rested on his silence. Vasily Arkhipov was not the captain. He was not shouting. He was not panicking. He was listening. Arkhipov was the flotilla commander, the highest-ranking officer on board. Without his approval, the torpedo could not be launched. He knew something the others did not. He knew that silence did not mean war. He knew that confusion was not confirmation. And most importantly, he knew that once that torpedo was fired, there would be no undoing it. The captain demanded action. The political officer demanded obedience. The submarine crew waited, terrified. Vasily spoke calmly. "There is no confirmation of war," he said. "We must surface and communicate." The captain exploded in anger. "You want us to die like cowards?" Arkhipov stood his ground. If he agreed, millions would die. If he refused, he could be court-martialed or executed. But Arkhipov wasn't thinking about punishment. He was thinking about cities, families, children who would never know why the sky turned white. And he said the word that changed history: no. For long seconds, no one spoke. The submarine creaked. The air grew thinner. The explosions stopped. Arkhipov's refusal held. Slowly, painfully, B-59 surfaced. Above them, American ships waited, guns ready, radars locked. But no nuclear fire came from the sea. No missiles launched. No cities vanished. What neither side knew in that moment was how close the world had come. One more yes, one moment of fear instead of restraint, and the Cold War would have become a nuclear one. Instead, because one man refused to panic, the crisis cooled. Diplomats resumed talks. Missiles were withdrawn. The world stepped back from the edge. No parades were held. No medals were awarded. Arkhipov returned home in silence. Almost no one knew what he had done. For decades, Vasily Arkhipov's name was missing from history books. He lived a quiet life, no fame, no recognition. The world celebrated leaders and generals, but not the man who stopped them from destroying it. Only years later, when classified documents were released, did historians understand the truth. One man prevented nuclear war. American officials admitted it. Soviet officials admitted it. If Arkhipov had agreed, there would have been retaliation, then escalation, then extinction. He wasn't armed with power. He was armed with restraint. In a world trained to obey orders, he chose responsibility. In a moment that rewarded aggression, he chose patience. And because of that choice, you are alive. History teaches us about battles, but it rarely teaches us about pauses, about the moments when someone chooses not to act. Vasily Arkhipov didn't save the world with a weapon. He saved it with a word: no. No to fear. No to panic. No to irreversible destruction. His story reminds us of something uncomfortable but essential. The fate of millions can rest on a single human decision. Not made by the loudest voice, not made by the most powerful leader, but by the calmest person in the room. When the world demanded violence, one man chose restraint. And because of that, the world still exists to tell the story.